Oh, please do make that joke again, Bill.
What are we talking about today?
Memory.
I'm sorry, what are we talking about today?
Mm, boom,
Need
boom.
need a rim shot.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Speaking of Seeing. This is a conversation with Bill Wadman
That's me.
and me, Sandi Robertson.
Yep, that's you.
Memory game. I have been wondering about why we remember the things we do and thinking about the kind of meta narrative of our memory is
Hmm.
not just about maybe, not just about choosing what we remember, but there's lots of function to memory, isn't there? Very useful thing to have. Memory helps us navigate now safely in some ways. Um, but Bill, something you remember, something that really stands out in your memory. Tell me.
Right there, right off the cuff.
Off the cuff.
Uh, I was actually just thinking, this is going to be really cheesy. I was walking to my shoot today and I walked by the spot that I first kissed my wife. And so I had a thing thinking about the fact that that location, which is on the steps of a Catholic church, and I am non-religious, is arguably one of the most important places in my life. And I walked by
When
it.
you remember it, Bill, are
Mhm.
you in it or are you looking at it?
Both. Um, I'm in it. I'm in it, but with the all of the knowledge I have now in the last 17 years since it happened.
Do you think
17
that's
years. Oh
changed
my God, that's a long
memory?
time. There's people who say that every time you recall a memory, you change it a little bit.
But even if you're not in the action of remembering, is somehow the memory being changed whilst being unremembered, if you see what I mean? Is simply
Yeah,
the passage of time something that, if not a kind of process of erasure, then certainly something of change?
sure. And I mean, one other thing I'd like to add is that I think sometimes forgetting about things is very useful. You know, you can forget the bad things and remember the good things, perhaps. Do you fear forgetting things?
I have become more forgetful actually. I don't know if it's a sort of middle-aged thing, perimenopausal thing or something, but I'm not as good at remembering things like facts and figures as I was like
Yeah.
10 years ago.
I mean, like, I fear forgetting what my father sounded like stuff like that.
But even when you look at that very closely and you think of the fear of forgetting that particular part of your life, why do you fear it?
Because I think that because I loved that person, I feel like if I forget how they sounded, it means I don't love them as much or something.
But isn't it so that you might not remember it, but that it is you should be safe that it's in you.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, man. Do you have control over your memories? It just feels so autonomic, right?
Mhm.
Um, what you remember, what you forget, what kind of falls away into the fog. You know, if I sit down at a piano right now, I used to be able to play, Chopin ballades, and I can play three chords now, because it's all gone. But, there's recordings of me playing these things. Um, but it's kind of still in there somewhere, maybe.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
Um, when we're remembering, I'm wondering if we can remember things that haven't actually happened to us,
Hmm.
like
Haven't
things.
happened yet, or haven't happened, will never happen.
No, more just I mean, I've put Sugimoto here from the theatre series,
Sure.
because I love the idea. I mean, from a photographic perspective, I love the idea that, you would have a really long exposure in a movie theatre or any form of theatre, and that there would be some blank space within which we might project what we want. And I was thinking of that really as a kind of metaphor for memory, because I think of memory as a kind of theatre. And I wonder if
And
through like the work that I do, the more kind of performative work that I do in my own kind of art practice, which is quite obscure, and I know I don't talk about it very much. You know, I'm crafting, I guess, for want of a better word, a lie
mhm.
to give people a sense it's okay for them to have a memory of something that might not be completely right or true in a really standard way of thinking about it. I'm creating scaffolds for them to remember what it is like to be sad. But I'm doing that under kind of false pretenses, I suppose. And some people
Sure.
really rally against that. They don't like that idea. They think it's terribly dishonest. But, in another way, you could say, well, it's just acting.
Well, I mean, to be the one on the woo side of the scale today, I mean, maybe it's sort of you're remembering the things you wish had happened.
Well, yes. And if we're remembering what we wish had happened, is there a problem with that ever?
Well, I mean, yes, I'm sure that is a problem sometimes. Uh, but I don't know, man. Like the older I get and the more life I live, the more I figured people get to spend their time how they want on this earth. And if they want to start remembering things that didn't happen because it makes them feel good inside or something, or it allows them to control their, maybe it's like I don't know. It's like, you think it's a conscious thing?
Well, I'm just looking at why, isn't it curious that um, like, there's no mechanism in the mind for ensuring the truth
Yeah.
and
Oh,
for recollection? I mean, that's a
yep.
paraphrase really from something I think it was Oliver Sacks said. There's no check-in really within the self for truth about recollection.
Yep.
Sometimes we live a memory that isn't ours, and I find that strange. And I mean, my favorite word of the year is fascinating, but I do find that fascinating. That is the right word to use.
Do you think that there are memories that are near and dear to you? I don't know, let's say the birth of your child or some kind of like big event, right?
Hmm.
That you remember happening a certain way that if you went back and watched a videotape, it wouldn't have happened that way.
I think that's almost certainly the case. Sometimes things are really brought up short, aren't they? Where, I mean, film and photography, that is actually the mechanism, isn't it? Often
Yeah.
we have a
Yeah.
mechanism for remembering in photographs, and obviously now, particularly in the advent of our phones recording
Yeah.
everything, we can record.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes I have been stunned really by how separated I've become from actuality. And I sometimes, and it's not been a desire, or not one that I've been conscious of anyway, to transform a memory, but that I'm looking at the space that we may have in our mind's eye to see something, to have a past, to recollect that which is not really true. That word's a sticky word for me, true, because there's truth in everything, isn't there? Even a lie has truth in it.
You know what's interesting? That sorry, when you first brought this slide up,
Mm,
you said something along the lines of like that you see it as the screen is a blank screen for people to sort of choose to project what they want to see on it. Is that something along the lines of how you were analyzing it?
possibly, yeah.
Okay. It's interesting because I've seen this photograph hundreds of times. I always thought of it as whatever was on the screen was just on there so long that it went white because it was like too much information, like it burned out the screen, like the exposure was overexposed on the screen,
Yeah.
that it wasn't intentionally white necessarily. It's just the sort of like that's how it ended up. So
Well,
where you see it as everything to project onto, I see it as everything that was projected from it. You know what I'm saying? It's like two different views of it.
I do. And they're both absolutely right, aren't they? You know,
Potentially, sure, yeah,
what the intention of Sugimoto was, I think he was in New York and he went into a movie theater and he did just start experimenting in like the 1970s with theaters and
yeah,
screens. And so this is a really long series in which he visited many, many different theaters and did this same thing, had this same quality of
yep,
almost like otherness, how strange it is for us even just to see an empty theater, which of
yeah.
course,
No one's in there, sure.
but also maybe people were in there. It's kind of like that Degas photograph of the boulevard in Paris
Yeah,
where
there's just the shoe shine. Yeah,
you shine boy, so it's maybe the same thing. But
that was super photo nerd of the two of us just then. You know that. There's like six other people in the world who are like, oh yeah,
yeah,
that
no,
that
there's
daguerreotype, the
more.
first
There
picture
will
of a
be more
human.
people than that. I mentioned Oliver Sacks because I paraphrased something that he said, but I wanted to use a kind of anecdote from something he wrote about. Um, and it was to do with his childhood. He had been an evacuee, I think, and he and his brother after the Second World War were talking about their experience of being in their home. And Oliver Sacks brought up this terrible memory of the house being bombed.
Mhm.
Um, and the brother said to him, "We weren't in the house when that happened." And
Yeah,
I mean, I'm really compressing this story, but essentially the older brother had still remained in the home and had written to them about it. And it had been so vivid to the young Oliver in his mind that he had taken the memory on for himself.
yeah.
And I know I have myself done that many times actually with things that have been explained to me, things that I don't know or haven't lived directly.
You weren't there, but it felt like you have memories of you being there, that kind of
Well, it
thing.
becomes part of my narrative, doesn't it?
Sure, sure.
Anyway, there are lots of questions in this. Do we want to remember things? Um, do we sort of
You,
do we own memory?
yeah,
Um,
you hear those stories about the people with autobiographical perfect memory and stuff.
yeah.
And it's actually a problem because they remember everything, every conversation, every little snipe that somebody, their lover, said to them one time in 1994. They remember it and it still hurts.
Yeah, but also I wonder even if that's playing out in someone's mind, this extraordinary savant-like mind of, as you're saying, an autobiographical memory. I wonder how our memories are actually distilled. I know someone very smart who's a scientist will be able to tell me about the neuroscience of this, but I'm looking at this obviously more philosophically. A distillation of history doesn't just happen in our own lifetime or within our own span of conscious memory.
Yep.
And, in psychology, we might talk about the archetype or think about how far back we could go in our kind of almost like our consciousness. I don't really want to chuck in, I existed in my grandmother's ovaries or anything like that, but I'm looking at how there is an ancestry that lives in each of
Mhm.
us. And though we might not remember it, some part of us is remembering, in that memory isn't just about our conscious storytelling.
Sure. I mean, there's the scientific or somewhat scientific sort of generational trauma kind of stuff, um, which some of which I understand or agree with, and some of which I think is a little questionable. But it is interesting nonetheless, right?
Mm,
Um, Man, this feels so. It's funny because the fruit rinds. It feels so 17th century Dutch painting.
well, it is, and that's exactly what Reyes wants from us. I mean, when I first started out, and I talked to you first of all those years ago now, Justine Reyes was also someone that I spoke to. I was really interested in this work, the Vanitas work. And I spoke to her for my students, thinking about being a photographer, but wanting to work in a Vanitas style.
Hmm.
And anyway, I spoke to her at length about her family. She was lovely to talk to, and she was full of
Much better than you, Bill.
yes, how I wish she had been my speaking of.
Go
Anyway,
ahead.
she had a very rich family history. There had been lots of kind of intergenerational living, and she'd collected a lot of stuff as her uncle and her grandmother passed away. This is her grandmother's button box.
Hmm.
She photographed all these things, and they became part of the memento mori, in her practice. And I think there's something very familiar about this, not just because I myself had a grandmother with a button box, but because thinking about how generationally we pass on the kind of stories of our families, and that is, of course, part then of our memory. And going back to what we were saying before, I know that I've been told stories by my grandmother when she was alive that I have kind of patched into my own consciousness.
Hmm.
And it doesn't matter that I was not there. And with the support of things like photographs, my family, I don't know about yours, but very much, certainly my mum's side of the family, very much about storytelling and looking at images or photographs of each other, going back, having archives, making diaries, diarizing, events and so on. I feel like there's this richness underpinning my actual memory that gives me a memory that has a greater scope than my life. And
Yeah. It's
I
like a
don't
superset of what you've experienced.
yes, and anyway, this photograph and there's others in this series really kind of encapsulate this for me.
I don't
This
know that I know her work. What does the rest of it look like?
I think she teaches it. Um, she at
She in New
Parsons.
York?
Yeah, she's
Oh, I'll try to get a hold of her then. Okay.
yeah, she was really interesting. She was in very similar, I think, similar age to me, maybe a bit younger. Was in the throes of parenting young children when I spoke
Sure.
to her. She had a lot going on, but she's visiting lecturer. She's super smart. She's got a lot of work similar to this in the Vanitas series. She's also got lots of work with plastic bags, like
Hmm.
grocery shopper bags.
Sure.
What you call them. I would just
They're
call them.
they're 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 well, it's probably just plastic bag, but they're illegal now, so it's interesting.
Yeah, she had a huge collection of them, and she photographed things like her, as I said, multi-generational household. She'd had I think, an uncle that either lived in her family home or very close by, and she photographed almost like an itemized, like an inventory of his belongings. It's
Hmm.
very intimate, very beautiful, meaningful work. Um, anyway, from memory, I'm looking now at whether I want to have a memory. Can I command it? I think you suggested something similar earlier. Can
Yeah.
I say to myself, I want to remember, and can I bring it up? And I've realized because my memory is quite poor at the moment for, as I said, dates and names and stuff. I used to have the most extraordinary memory, Bill. I mean, it's not showing
Yeah.
off to be truthful about it. I was really like a marvel.
Yeah.
I could just pull it from anywhere. And the same, you talked about playing the piano. I mean, I would play from start to finish
Yeah.
with no music, nothing. Where is all of it? Sometimes, if
Yeah.
I'm maybe a bit drunk and I sit at the piano, some of it comes out, and I think, where the hell's this coming from? My fingers can't keep up with it, but there is something that's just not engaged or
Yeah.
unlocked. Anyway,
It's all I there are pictures that I took in London in 2006, 2005 that I've always thought I know exactly where that picture was taken.
mm,
And in the years later, I've gone back to London and I'd be like, did they rejigger these streets right here? Because this is where it was, but this looks different. I know this is where it was, but these posts look different or whatever it is. Like, did they redo these posts? Like, there's this kind of stuff where I used to have really amazing spatial memory and sense of direction, and it's not as good as it used to be. And it weirds me out. Also, all of a sudden, in the last like 5, 10 years.
Well, there's
Um,
lots of studies. If you want to find out more about the kind of philosophy of memory, there's so much on the philosophy of memory, and I mean, I guess in a physical sense, our brain does a particular thing with a particular part of the brain. Um, that organic matter matters for
yeah,
memory, but thinking about memory, considering memory, and trying to sort of understand memory from a meaningful philosophical perspective is endless in itself.
yep. You could
Um,
also get trapped in memory and not be in the present too, right? I mean, that's a whole other thing.
sure. Um,
Now, who are these people?
well, do you remember them?
Yes, these are when we were showing our family pictures.
Well done, Bill. These are my grandparents.
Yeah. Your
Uh,
father's parents?
No, my mum's parents.
Your mom's parents?
So I I did a it wasn't meant to be an unpleasant trick, but I put this image in a pack that I provided for a dialogue group that I was working with. And we were talking about memory the other week. And I said, can you remember them? And it was so interesting how many people said, I know them. I remember them. But they
Yeah.
couldn't put their finger on it. And it was as if by me saying that these should be memorable,
It made people think that they had a memory even if they didn't.
they remembered them. Yeah. No, but really, we looked at it properly. They really believed that they remembered them. They couldn't place where from.
Yeah.
You know, there was the usual thing like, are they movie stars? Who are they? Who are they? Are they nobody got nobody thought for a minute they were actually my grandparents and it's just a
Yeah.
family photograph.
Have you ever seen a picture of yourself that you don't remember having taken? Like picture of yourself where you're like, I have no recollection of being there and having being in front of a camera.
Oh, lots now. Yeah.
Like back in uni, like everyone's going out drinking, that kind of thing, or
Yeah, I mean, there's even a photograph of me in Amsterdam, and I thought, have I ever been to Amsterdam?
well, apparently you have. There's a photograph of you there.
Mind, right? But I mean, I wasn't that chaotic. But
I
I
don't know
just,
enough about your younger years. Who knows what you were up to?
I mean, quite a lot actually, particularly in my sort of mid-teens.
Hmm.
I got up to a lot, but then I calmed down and became extremely responsible and sensible, as you know me now.
Oh
But
yes.
anyway, the whole point about this really is to try and question, almost like, where's the location of my memory? Where does my memory start and end? Is my memory like my memory? I can remember now, obviously, what was just seconds ago, and I can remember us starting this conversation this evening, and I wonder how long it will last. And I wonder
Yeah.
how swiftly it would change. And I think we're recording this, so there's a sense of there being a kind of immediate legacy that we can check.
That'll be there longer than you and I are going to remember about this particular conversation. I mean, we've done what, 60, 80 of these things?
Oh, we've done
It's
more than that, Bill.
more than that. Okay. However, 100 and something. Do you remember every one that we did? You know what I mean?
No, and it's funny when I look back over them because I think, God, really? Look how young we look, apart from anything
Do we
else.
look different even a few years ago?
Yes, definitely do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, your hair just gets more
Oh
North
my
Korean
God.
as we go along.
Oh my
Um,
God.
Anyway, memory. And by the way, these are the grandparents. This my grandmother was a fantastic storyteller.
Oh,
And
okay.
there are things that she told me that I suppose she'd been told.
Yeah.
And suddenly I realized that I'm stretching a memory that doesn't belong to me
Yep.
back into almost like
Didn't
150,
belong to her. Yeah.
150 years, you know. So, and that takes us right back to a time when, you know, where did they come from? You know, these
Yeah.
people, they came from other places. They'd striven for things. They came from,
You have memories of Mary Queen of Scots in your brain.
well, isn't that the case that any American from Scotland is a chieftain or a
Sure, of course. They have their own little tartan and the whole nine.
Bill? I know it's lovely for you to mention about your first kiss with Heather, but
Mhm.
is there another memory from a slightly longer ago that stands out?
Uh, I remember. It's funny. I don't have that many memories uh, from my deep childhood. Although, man, what was it the other day? Something came up the other day that I hadn't thought about in 40, 50 years. It was like some product that I smelled or something I hit, and I went, oh my God, that reminds me of my elementary school. And it like snapped me back to walking down my kindergarten hallway, you know?
Yeah.
Those kinds of things are really weird because you think, oh, I haven't thought about that in forever. And yet it just, the smell of this cleaner took me back there.
That doesn't that mean sort of but the same logic would say that all those piano pieces are still in there.
Yeah. Well, I
Ev-
think if I sat down
everything-
and actually wanted to relearn them, they'd probably come back to me way faster than I would have learned them in the first place. You know what I mean?
Do you have an earliest memory?
My earliest memories are from like nursery school. I remember getting picked up from nursery school. So I don't know, what would that be? Five, four? I actually have pretty sparse memories before fourth grade,
Mm.
weirdly. Um,
Well, I wondered with Imogen as she got older, and I asked her about what she remembered from being very young because I loved it when Imogen was still, you know, 2.5, 3. I knew I could observe her becoming aware of time.
mhm,
In one way, it was kind of sad, but in another way, it's just it's like being a parent. A kind of hidden pleasures of that
sure.
are also often tinged with a kind of melancholy. And one of them was observing how she started to conceptualize time.
Yeah.
All very standard stuff. But I realized that there was a disconnect in memory when she got to be about 8 or 9, where before I could have asked her about things she would have remembered from being a toddler, even.
Yeah. Your
It
brain
was
lets go
like
of it. Yeah.
rapidly fell away. And I
Yeah.
wonder if it's just to do with like a cognitive development at that age and stage, where instead the kind of the lucid nature of being 7 or 8 takes over the
Sure.
memory somehow.
It's weird when you like little kids. My nephew used to say yellow, but he used to say lello. And we still will say lello, Heather and I, as like a joke to each other, referencing Bert saying it. But
Yeah.
he has no recollection of ever saying that, you know?
Mm.
Things that happen that it's gone from them, but we remembered even though we both experienced it and they have a much shorter life.
Well, that's the other thing is, we're very positional with our memories. My memory wants my daughter's memory to align with mine, even
Sure.
though mine has been warped by
Yep.
my experience.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just to, share something that is very personal. My daughter can't remember, it seems to me, that much from our very happy times from her childhood before
Yeah.
everything became very complicated and her father and I separated. And it makes me feel really sad because I can remember things and they seem so full and so light and so happy. And I don't know really if she can properly remember them,
Hmm.
but she can remember things from, very unpleasant, unhappy time.
Sure.
From
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, just from her slightly older years, and it's such a shame that there's still not a light on
Sure. Yeah.
those other things.
On Saturday, my father used to work every other Saturday on record stores, and him and his business partner used to swap Saturdays. And if we were off, like it would, oh, could I come to work with you tomorrow, Daddy? That kind of thing. And my sister or I sometimes would get to go to work, and we'd, work, and they'd pay us $4 an hour to, help out at the store and do whatever. And usually we'd come home with records that we wanted. And, it was like a whole thing. But I remember that feeling of him saying yes and sort of being the chosen one who got to go with him the next day. It was a rare thing. It probably only happened 6 or 10 times in my life, when I was growing up.
Have you
But
corroborated this with your sister?
well, she's 3 years older, so I'm sure she has similar but different memories of it. But the I just remember my father owned a Datsun 280ZX, like a little sports car. And I remember like what the doors felt like when they closed. I remember what it smelled like inside the car.
Yeah.
The sort of faux leather around the emergency brake handle, like all these kinds of things that it feels like another lifetime.
Well, these are the things I wonder, when we think about death and we think about the moments before death when we're supposed to have our life flash in front of our eyes.
Flashbacks, yeah.
And I think, what inane shit am I going to be remembering? What
Yeah,
details from my
but
everyday will I
but it
have
might be
use of?
those details in inane shit that actually are not necessarily the most important things, but they will make you feel all kinds of things about your life.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, Bill, we have a vast archive
Vast.
of all kinds of inane conversations between you and I.
Someday people will look these up when we're all long gone and be like, what is this weird YouTube archive over here? Who
Who's
are
this,
these people?
who's this strange cynic and
What's
this?
that strange accent that woman has?
I think your accent is far stranger than mine.
It's true, it is.
Anyway, bye, Bill.
Bye.